All right, guys, so we are jumping into our next media or medium that we're gonna learn about. And just like we always do, we need to learn our techniques before we start practicing and planning and figuring out what we want to do for our artwork. So just like we talked about, we are starting our work with oil pastels. And I'm so excited because oil pastels are a really unique medium. They are similar to crowns, just like we kind of talked about, but very different. And remember, whenever you finish a completed pastel piece, it's actually called a painting, not a drawing. So we're going to learn some of these techniques that are similar to drawing techniques, but also kind of a blend between painting and drawing techniques. So there are going to be a total of 6 different techniques that we will work through. And then we're going to practice making a tint and a shade. So we're going to have to pull in some of our old color theory vocabulary and apply some of the stuff that we've learned before in order to make these really successful. Okay, so to start, the very first technique that we're going to do is called a heavy pressure blend. Basically what this is going to go from one color to another color, and we're going to use quite a bit of pressure in order to blend these 2 colors together. So before we start this one, what you should have with you at your spot are 2 paper towels. You can just tear a really big one in half. You need 4 pastels. So you need a darker color like this blue, a lighter color like the yellow, a white, and a black. I'll make sure that you have all of these at your table with you before we get started. Keep in mind that these pastels are not brand new, so some of them have some dirty stuff around it and stuff like that. So we'll want to make sure that we clean those off before we use them, and I'll show you how to do that really quick. So before I do that, we're going to talk about the heavy pressure blend. So these are going to be just with your yellow and your blue, so a lighter color and a darker color. I tend to like to start pastels with my lighter color just because it's similar to watercolor. You can always add dark, but you can't bring stuff out of it. And so you can do some blending on top and you'll experience some of that and see what I'm talking about. But for the most part, you want to start with your lightest values, then go into your darkest, and then blend it back in. So just like I said a moment ago, we're going to clean off some of these edges, and that's what your paper towel is here for. So you can kind of make sure that it's good to go and cleaned off. So I'm going to start on this left side, and how you do a heavy pressure blend is kind of just like it sounds. You start with a heavy pressure. Now I'm going to press down pretty hard as I blend this in. And I'm going to create somewhat of a value scale with this yellow. You don't have to go through the whole box, but as I get about halfway through, I'm going to pick my yellow up and have a little bit less stuff. Now you might get some of these flecks on there. All you have to do is kind of pick them up with either your finger or with your pastel and place them on your paper towel. Make sure that they always end up on your paper towel. So now that I have my yellow kind of laid in, I'm going to come back with my blue and do the same thing but the opposite direction. And so I'm going to blend this pretty heavily. Don't press too hard to where you break it, but you will want some heavier pressure with it. And you'll notice that as you work through this, it starts making a green in the middle. Now you can always bring your yellow back in and kind of swirl it in there with some of that heavier pressure. Okay. And that makes a nice green. See, notice how you get that on there, so I would always wipe it off so it's available and ready for the next time, okay? So that's your heavy pressure blend. Our next one that we're gonna do is extremely similar. It is a light pressure blend. So basically the same idea, but you are going to take the yellow, and instead of having a really heavy pressure when I press down on it, I'm going to do it a little bit lighter. So this is really nice when you're laying in your first layers of things. So again, start on the left side and create somewhat of a value scale. And then I'm going to bring my blue back in here too. See how it's not quite as dark, but it's still the same idea. You still want controlled movements and it not to get too crazy. I'm going to bring this yellow back in and lightly swirl. So don't press too hard. Swirling with pastels is a really good way to blend them in. And notice how I get kind of a really cool green and a nice texture in there. Okay, so the next one that we're going to do is called a stipple. And this is basically creating value and blending with a bunch of different dots. So I'm gonna again start with my yellow, and I'm going to just go through and create some dots. The closer the dots are together, the darker the value. The farther they are apart, the lighter the value. So again, I'm going to start with the darkest yellow, like my darkest value of yellow on the left. And it's going to sound kind of crazy in here. Just embrace it. It'll be fun. And then as I get towards the middle, see how I'm making those further apart, so it's a lighter value, a darker value, and they're closer together. Now I'm going to bring this blue in, and the same thing. Awesome. So as you can see, some of this right here has begun to blend together and do some green and look really, really cool. So I'll pick that up so you can kind of see it a little bit closer. Stipple, heavy pressure, light pressure. Okay, the next one we're gonna do is probably my favorite. It's really fun and really unique. It's called scumbling. S-C-U-M-B-L-I-N-G, scumbling. Basically a fancy word for scribbling. So you can create different shaped scribbles, and again, the closer they are together, the darker the value, the further they are apart, the lighter the value. You can also do this with a variety of like C-shaped marks. So I'm kind of doing like these little marks like that. Okay, now I'm gonna go in and add my blue. And you'll see how that starts to blend in the middle. On scumbling and stippling, one thing that I want to show y'all real quick that's really fun is to bring in your white, and remember to always clean off your white because they can get the dirtiest, and that's the biggest bummer when your white has stuff on it. So first I'm going to head to the stippling again and show y'all what it looks like to add some white into it. It creates some interesting blending and textures and things like that. So you can do some really cool stuff with the white. Now, let's see what happens when I add it into the scumbling. You'll see how it kind of starts blending some of that in there and create some interesting stuff. And we can bring our yellow back in. And you can just kind of play with what this looks like. Scumbling is one of my favorite things to do for fun, like nature textures and organic textures and different things like that. Okay, so the next one that we're gonna do is called, it's an interesting word, so bear with me. It's called sgraffito. Sgraffito. This one's really fun. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with my lightest value first, and I'm gonna lay in kind of a darker layer, like that. And then I'm gonna bring in my darker value color, so my blue, and add in another layer on top of it. Now you can use a pencil, a popsicle stick, the edge of your ruler, or whatever you want. I'm just gonna use my pencil, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna create some interesting details, and it can create kind of like a scratch board. So the problem with using your pencil is that you'll start to see those pencil and pin marks through it, but it does create a nice little thing. Now, as we're working on these and you notice those little flecks, try your best to keep those off of the floor and just on your spare paper towel. So that's sgraffito. Basically where you're layering in a layer of one color and then another one, and then you're creating a scratch board type effect or look. It's really fun for different types of details or nature or little different things like that. Okay, so the very last one that we're gonna do before we do our tint and our shade is called a pressure blend. Now this might sound similar to the two above, but it is slightly different. So bear with me. What you're gonna do now is the same approach that we did up here. You're gonna take the yellow And you're gonna do kind of a little bit darker value, not quite as heavy as your heavy pressure blend. And then I'm gonna bring my blue back in. Okay. So now, instead of using the pastel itself to blend it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create kind of a blending stump with a paper towel. Don't use your actual blending stumps for this because it'll ruin them. But one thing that you can do is you can bring in your paper towel and blend, 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 blend. So it creates kind of this soft look. Keep in mind that once you do this, it's gonna be somewhat difficult to blend things on top of it. So this really should be your last resort of blending. So what I would not do with this is don't lay something in and then bring in your paper towel and go over it. I would make this one of your final touches. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a tint, and I'm going to do it with blue. So tint, if you remember, is white plus a hue. So I'm gonna start here and start with my darker color. I like to add white and black, even though they might be the lighter or the darker value. I like to add those last, just because they're easier to control when you do that. Okay, so there's my little value scale with that. And what I like to do is I like to kind of swirl it in. Okay, so there's my tint. And if you need to come back in and, you know, rework it a little bit, that's a-okay. So there's my tint. Okay, now I'm going to do a shade. Remember, black is pretty heavy and potent with whatever medium you are using. So I'm only going to go about halfway. I'm going to lift up some pressure with that black. And then I'm going to bring my blue back in and blend some of that back together. So this can take practice for you to kind of get exactly where you want to go with it, and that's okay. So this is now your shade. All right, so there you have it. You have your 6 different pastel techniques in a tint and a shade, and a lot of really cool things that you can take and apply to your pastel artwork.